You felt it. You know what I'm talking about. That thing that invades without permission, that thing that arrives without asking, and that doesn't scream, but silences, that doesn't demand, but corrodes. That absence of him. You've been there, haven't you? With your eyes open, your body present, but something inside seemed to have stopped, as if the sky had locked its windows and the sound of God's voice simply stopped echoing. And you tried. You tried to speak. You tried to pray. You tried to cry out, but there was no answer. And the silence that was supposed to be peace became a burden, an absence that consumes, a weight that doesn't pass. And you look around, see so many saying, feel the presence, and you don't feel it. And then, what do you do? What do you do when God is silent? But I want you to hear this. The sky is not silent because it has forgotten. There is a sound that does not escape the human, but that reverberates in the spirit, a sound that is not sound, an answer that is not a word. Have you ever noticed how sometimes what marks us the most is what was never said? That tear that fell silently, that look that didn't look, but said everything, the emptiness that filled with meaning, and you're still there, asking, why? Have you ever felt like you were walking with your hands outstretched in the dark, feeling the walls, searching for any sign, any touch that says, I'm still here? And it seems that the more you try, the further away you get, as if the presence that was once so familiar had evaporated without warning. How to explain this to someone who has never been through it? How to say that God is silent without seeming like you've lost faith? But you haven't lost faith. You're just going through a place where faith doesn't shout, it whispers. And sometimes, not even that. And it is in this invisible terrain, in this space that seems abandoned, that God plants something in you. Something that is not born in the light, but in the dark. Because there are things that the sky only teaches in silence, and you don't know it, but you are being molded. Not with thunder, not with visible miracles, but with apparent absence. You think you've been forgotten. But could it be that silence is teaching you more than any immediate answer could? Could it be that what you call abandonment is just preparation? Because waiting is also a school. The void also teaches. And God is more present in the silence than you imagine. Have you ever stood in front of someone waiting for them to say something? And what hurt the most was what wasn't said? What marked you the most was that look that turned away? So why should God's silence be less profound than that? There is weight in unspoken words, and there is power in the answers that don't come. Have you ever tried to hold back tears with a smile? Have you ever pretended to be okay while screaming inside? Have you ever walked among people as if everything was normal, while something inside was collapsing? And the worst part, no one noticed, because silence also hides. But God saw, and even without saying a word, He saw. But you still want to hear. You still need to, because the soul bleeds for answers, for direction. And when there is none, you start to get lost inside yourself, and the questions become louder than any answer that could come. Did I make a mistake? Did He leave me? Am I outside of His will? Have you ever asked yourself these questions? And the worst part is when time passes, and you keep waiting, and His absence begins to feel like abandonment, and what was faith turns into weariness. Have you ever reached that point? Of believing, but with a bitter taste, of continuing, but without energy, of praying, but without any hope of being heard. But there is something you cannot forget. His silence is never empty, never. It is a sacred space, painful, yes, incomprehensible often, but sacred, because it is there, in that silence, that true love is proven. Not the love that demands, but the one that waits. Not the love that asks for signs, but the one that continues even without seeing. And you're still there, still waiting, still believing, even if everything inside you tells you to give up. That is faith. That is surrender. That is what pleases God. Because loving when everything is okay is easy, but loving when there is no answer, loving when there is no touch, no voice, that is another level. You want to get out of there. I know. You want to understand. You want to feel again. But maybe, just maybe, you need to learn to trust without feeling, to believe without understanding, to follow, even without apparent direction. Because faith is not certainty. Faith is movement. And even in silence, you need to continue. But it hurts. It hurts because you gave yourself, you surrendered, you trusted, and you expected there to be an answer, that there would be a return. But instead, what came was a blank space, and that space has consumed you, and you try to fill it with words, with prayer, with praise, but it still feels empty. And then, what to do? Do you stop? Do you become silent? Do you hide? Or do you cling to the only thing that still remains, the certainty that God is, even when He doesn't manifest? You are not alone, even if it seems like it, even if all the signs say otherwise. There is something happening behind the veil. There is a movement that you cannot see, because not everything that is true is shown, and not everything that is absent is lost. And maybe what you need now is not an answer, but presence. Not words, but a touch. Not certainties, but a look that sees you completely, even when you hide from yourself. And He has that look. He saw you when no one saw you. He heard you when the sound of your pain didn't escape even through your lips. You are fighting with something that has no name. An absence that weighs more than 1,000 presences. A silence that screams louder than any voice. And it is at this point that faith ceases to be a concept and becomes survival. You survive. You continue. You breathe, even without knowing why. But listen. Listen with your heart, because your ears won't catch it. God is still writing your story, even if the pen is silent. Even if you don't see ink on the paper, He is writing, with tears, with blank spaces, with pauses, but writing. And one day you will look back and realize that what transformed you the most were not the miracles, but the silence between them. It was the time you continued, even without having anywhere to step. It was the space in which you didn't hear, but still believed. Do you still believe? Can you say, even now, without answers, without direction, without guarantees, I still trust? Because if you can, then heaven has already won inside you. And even if the world doesn't know, even if no one sees, there is something in you that all of hell fears. Because it is easy to believe with proof. It is difficult to believe with silence. But you are here. You are still here. And that says everything. Write in the comments, Holy Spirit, welcome, if you want to open your heart to the divine presence. And that says everything. You are still here, with eyes perhaps tired, with a heart raw, but you are here. Something in you resisted what seemed irreversible. Something in you, even if you don't understand, still insists on standing. And that is faith. Not the kind of faith that shines before the crowd, but the faith that survives in the dark, in the solitude of the room, in the wait without a date. You endured the weight of a silent sky and continued. Do you know why? Because within you there is something that is not of this world, something that logic does not reach, something that not even you can explain. You just know that, even without feeling, you can't let go. There is an invisible thread that binds you to what you don't see, and perhaps that is what confuses you the most. How to trust so much in something that seems so distant? But what if that distance is only apparent? What if the silence is, in fact, a way for God to show something that doesn't fit in words? Because there are things that only silence reveals. There are pains that only it heals. There are paths that only open when everything seems closed. Have you ever thought that perhaps what seems like abandonment to you is the beginning of a rebirth? You tried to understand. You tried to find explanations. You looked in books, in sermons, in advice. You tried to distract yourself. You tried to forget, but it didn't pass. The silence remained. The absence remained. And you thought you had done something wrong. That perhaps you had failed at some point, that you had lost something without realizing it. But listen, not everything that is silenced is punishment. Not every silence is absence. Sometimes, what you call emptiness is the space where God chose to move without being seen. And that's when faith ceases to be discourse. That's when it becomes flesh, becomes blood, becomes every sigh you release. Because you continue. And it is in continuing that the greatest of miracles manifests. It's not when you receive, it's when you remain. even without knowing when it will end, even without feeling anything anymore, even when everything you do seems to have no effect. How many times have you knelt without strength? How many times have you said, "I can't take it anymore"? How many times have you been silent because you no longer knew what to say? And even so, when everyone thought you had given up, you were still there, perhaps broken, perhaps in pieces, but there, and that still being is everything. Because there is a place where faith is not a leap, but crawling. It's not a firm voice, but a groan. And you arrived at that place. You have already been through it, or perhaps you are still in it. And that is when heaven bows down. Not before the strong, but before the one who insists on remaining even without strength. What you have been facing no one knows completely, because there are things that you have never been able to put into words. There are pains that you have never named. Wounds that you carry so deep that not even you know when they started. But God saw and continues to see. You don't need to explain. You don't need to justify. You just need to continue. And even if the will is to stop, even if everything in you says that it's no longer worth it, continue. Because there is a movement happening. You don't see it, but there is. You don't feel it, but there is. Do you remember when everything was lighter? When you prayed and felt? When it seemed that God was there, so close, so accessible. And now it seems so far away, so unattainable. You try to remember that time with longing, trying to cling to some memory that brings back that feeling. But it doesn't come back, because God is no longer there. He is here, in the now, even if you don't realize it. Because He is not limited to what you feel. He is not conditioned by your perception. He is. And what is doesn't need to prove itself. His presence doesn't depend on what you understand. His faithfulness doesn't move according to your mood. He is. He continues to be, even when you change, even when you can't maintain consistency, even when your faith wavers. He remains. And sometimes it is precisely in this silence that He reveals His constancy. Because while you doubt, He remains. While you think of giving up, He continues to sustain you. While you say, "I can't anymore," He whispers, "Even if you don't hear, I know. That's why I'm here." You may have a wounded heart. You may be surrounded by questions that have no answer. You may be dealing with fears that you hide from everyone. You may have nights that no one imagines, thoughts that no one knows. But even in those places, He is. Not because you deserve it, but because He chose to be. Have you ever stopped to think that perhaps what you are living is not a punishment, but an opportunity? An opportunity to know God in a dimension where few arrive. Because it is easy to know Him in abundance, in joy, in miracles. It is difficult to recognize Him in silence. It is difficult to discern His presence when everything in you screams that He is gone. But He hasn't gone, never has, never will. Because when He decides to be silent, it is not to distance Himself, it is to make you dive in. Go deeper. Go beyond the surface of emotions, beyond the fragility of sensations. Because the faith that survives in silence is the faith that transforms. And perhaps you are on the verge of something you don't yet understand. Perhaps you are one step away from an invisible breakthrough. But before that, you need to go through this darkness. You need to cross this desert. Because in the end, you will look back and see that it was exactly this silence that forged the truest version of who you are. Don't try to skip this process. Don't run. Don't try to rush what only time can mature. Let the silence fulfill its purpose. Let this apparent absence transform you into someone deeper. Because, in the end, it's not about how much you felt, but about how much you remained. And you remained. You made it this far. Even with everything saying the opposite. Even with a tired heart, with a confused mind, with an exhausted body. You arrived. And now just continue. Because even if you don't realize it, there is something happening behind the scenes of heaven. There is a silent orchestra tuning every detail. And when the right time comes, everything will make sense. But until then, continue. Even without understanding, even without feeling, even without strength, continue. Because God still is. And what He started in you, He will finish, even in silence. Write in the comments, "Holy Spirit, illuminate my path. if you believe that He is the light in the midst of darkness, you're still there. You're still breathing, still moving, still trying, still asking. And even if your feet are trembling, they haven't stopped. And even if your voice doesn't rise as before, you keep calling. Even if it's only with your thoughts, even if what used to be a cry is now just a lingering look at the sky, without words, without requests, a tired look, but full of hope. Hope without form, without name, without promises, but hope. And that's what heaven hears. That silence that you can no longer explain. That hidden desire among the rubble of your soul, because you still desire. You still want to touch what you don't see. You still believe in something beyond what you are living. And even when you say it's over, something inside you murmurs, just a little longer. But time hurts, and time tires, because it seems that everything you hold slips through your fingers, and what used to make sense doesn't anymore. And you wonder if you've ever understood anything, if you've ever really had control of anything. And you begin to realize that perhaps everything you've tried to control hasn't been in your hands for a long time. You hid behind a role, a behavior, an organized faith. You created a structure where everything had a place. Everything made sense, until it didn't anymore. And when that world collapsed, when certainties evaporated, when what was firm turned to dust, you had to deal with what had always been there, but you never wanted to look at fear. You tried to pretend everything was okay, that you were strong, that you trusted, and in some ways, you even did trust. But now you see yourself as fragile, vulnerable, lost within a plan you don't understand. And it's at this exact point that heaven draws near, not when you're standing tall, full of answers and declarations, but when you fall, when there's no strength left to convince anyone, not even yourself. And yet, God continues, because what He seeks isn't perfection. It never was. He seeks surrender, and the surrender that heaven values isn't the pretty kind, full of words and rituals. It's the kind that comes when you have nothing left, when you no longer know what to do, when your knee bends not out of strength, but out of collapse, when tears stream uncontrollably, when your heart opens because it can't bear to keep anything hidden anymore. And you've reached that point, haven't you? You know what I'm talking about. You've faced nights that didn't end with the sunrise. You've gone through days where every sound seemed to echo empty. You've heard words of encouragement that sounded like noise, because what you needed was a touch that no one could give. But there's a touch that doesn't come through hands. It comes from within. It's not felt with the skin. It's felt with the soul. It's as if something awakens inside you. An old memory, a recollection that you were seen even before you existed, as if someone was always there, even when everything seemed lost. You want to understand why. Why the wait? Why the pain? Why this prolonged absence? But what if the question isn't why, but what for? What if this silence isn't punishment, but a process? And what if, instead of pushing you away, it's slowly stripping you of everything that prevented you from seeing clearly? Because pain reveals, silence exposes, absence illuminates what presence concealed. You wouldn't be like this if everything was still the way it always was. If God had answered the way you wanted, perhaps He would never have touched that deepest, rawest point, where there are no more masks, where only truth remains. And there you are, naked before the invisible, without embellishments, without excuses, just you. And that's all He ever wanted, for you to allow yourself to be, without filters, for you to place yourself before Him as you are. Because God doesn't act upon the character you created, He acts upon who you are. And for that, He needed to take everything away, the stage, the lights, the rehearsed lines, the practiced gestures, and He led you into the dark, where there's no audience, where only reality exists. Is it hard? Yes. Does it hurt? Yes. But it's there that essence is born. It's there that faith ceases to be theory. Because what's being done inside you doesn't compare to what's being delayed outside. And as much as you're waiting for something external, God is building something internal. And when that's ready, when it's ready, everything will align. Everything will fall into place. And you'll understand that nothing was in vain. But until then, don't try to escape the pain. Don't try to mask the emptiness. Don't try to shorten the process. Because there's beauty being generated in this darkness. There's something sacred being molded in the place where no one sees. And God is in no hurry. Because what is eternal isn't built by rushing. You've been hurt. You've been betrayed by expectations. You've given yourself where you weren't welcomed. You've planted where nothing sprouted. You've believed in promises that never arrived. And even so, you still dream. You still carry within you a spark of hope. That's a miracle. And heaven knows it. You look in the mirror and wonder if you still have anything of value. Because time has passed, and you feel like you've lost so much. Opportunities, time, peace. But none of that was wasted. Because in God's eyes, there's no loss when there's purpose. Everything was counted. Every tear, every attempt, every silence, everything recorded. And now you're on the edge. But not of an end. You're on the edge of a turnaround that doesn't depend on scenery. It depends on perception. When you realize that even what was lacking was taken care of. That even what left was deliverance. That even what didn't happen was salvation. Heaven never left. Never got distracted. Never took its eyes off you. Even when you took your eyes off Him. Even when you got lost within yourself. Even when you wanted to disappear. Still, He remained. And that remaining is the greatest act of love you could experience. So breathe, feel, allow yourself to be in this place. Don't fight the process. Receive what the silence wants to teach. Because it's not the end, it's just the middle. And whoever goes through it never comes out the same. You're being transformed, even if you don't see it, even if you don't understand it, even if it seems like nothing is happening. There's a deep, invisible, silent, but powerful work happening. And when all this passes, when the light comes back on, you won't be the same. And you'll be grateful for not giving up. You'll be grateful for having endured. You'll look back and realize that what seemed like absence was disguised presence, that what seemed like the end was the beginning, that what seemed dark was the womb, and that what seemed like silence was God whispering, "Trust, everything is under control." And it is. Even now, even here, even without understanding. Write in the comments, "Holy Spirit, flood my life." If you desire to be filled with the glory of God, you're still breathing. That's already proof. You survived the days when you thought you couldn't make it, the moments when the ground seemed to have disappeared and the weight inside your chest had no name. You went beyond what you thought was the limit. You went through the phase of doubt, of silent revolt, of unanswered prayer, of time that doesn't forgive, and you're still here. Not in the same way, maybe in pieces, maybe with cracks, maybe with wounds that haven't healed, but still, whole in what matters. And that's not by chance. That's not simple resistance. That's divine sustenance. Because if it were up to you, you would have stopped already. If it depended only on your strength, you would have given up already. But something greater sustained you. Something you don't see, but held you when everything was escaping. Something that didn't come from outside, but sprouted from within. When you thought it was the end, God whispered, "It's just the beginning." You didn't know. You didn't understand. And even without understanding, you continued. And that pleases heaven, because you didn't trust out of emotion. You didn't stay for reward. You stayed out of love, a love that hurt, that was tested, that bled in silence, that went through the dark night without seeing the dawn. But still, it remained. Do you know why? Because deep down, even when everything in you wanted to stop, there was still something that said, "There's more." Even if you didn't know what that more was, even if you weren't sure if it would ever come, still, you waited. And waiting, when nothing seems to happen, is the deepest act of faith someone can offer. You saw doors close, relationships end, plans crumble. You lost time, lost opportunities, lost certainties. And even so, something in you still believes. Not with that noisy faith from before, not with that sparkle in your eyes that you had in the beginning, but with a mature, silent faith that knows that God isn't an event. God is presence. Presence that doesn't need to make noise to prove it's there. Presence that doesn't need to solve everything at once to be faithful. presence that doesn't depend on circumstances to manifest. And you learned that, not in the good days, but in the days when it seemed like everything was wrong. You learned that God doesn't change, even when everything changes. You thought you were going to get lost, and for a few moments you almost did get lost. But now you're starting to see. Still not everything, but enough to continue. Enough to say, it was worth it not to give up. Because now you feel that there's something different. Not on the outside, but inside. Something matured, something grew, something died, and something was born. You're not the same person anymore, and that's good, because what's to come needs this new version of you. That old one wouldn't have endured. That naive, anxious, hasty version wouldn't have reached what heaven prepared. But this one that was born from silence, from pain, from waiting, this one is capable of carrying what's coming. You went through the fire, not to be punished, but to be molded, because there are too many promises over you to live in any way. There's a purpose too great to be sustained by a fragile structure. It was necessary to forge. It was necessary to clean. It was necessary to dig deeper. And now you're ready, even if you don't feel like it. Because heaven doesn't expect perfection, it expects surrender. And you surrendered. You surrendered control, surrendered pride, surrendered your own wills. You finally made room for God to be everything, not just a part, not just a resource in difficult days, but everything. And when God is everything, the rest aligns, not immediately, not in your time, but in His time. Because what is His arrives, what is His remains, what is His transforms. You may be looking around and still not seeing much, but don't be fooled. Something is moving. Something has already started. Don't you feel it? That soft restlessness in your heart, that gentle breath in your soul, as if something new were being born. And it is. You're leaving the place where you hid. You're starting to lift your eyes again. You're going back to dreaming. Still with fear, still with caution, but you are. And that's what matters. That you don't allow what you've lived to prevent you from living what's still to come. Because there's more than you imagine, more than you asked for, more than you believed you deserved. You endured the weight of waiting. Now the time of the new is coming. Not a shallow, immediate new, packaged in empty promises, but a real, deep new, rooted in everything you've lived so far. A new that has a base, that has roots, that doesn't sway with any wind. And when it arrives, it won't be like before. It won't be about emotion. It will be about purpose. It won't be about filling a void. It will be about fulfilling a calling. It won't be to prove something to someone. It will be to glorify who sustained you when no one saw. You're on the edge. It may not seem like it. There may be no visible signs, but you feel it. You feel that the time has changed, that the silence no longer has the same weight, that the emptiness doesn't scare you like before. Because you discovered something. God was in the silence. God was in the dark. God was in the pain. And now that you know that, nothing stops you anymore. You may walk slowly, but you walk. You may still not understand everything, but you no longer doubt. You may even feel fear, but fear doesn't dominate you. Because now you know who sustains you. And that's enough. Heaven doesn't need to prove itself anymore. You've already seen it. You've already felt it. You've already survived what you thought would destroy you. And if you survived that, then you can endure anything. You have a path ahead. It won't be easy, but it will be full of glory. Not human glory. Glory that comes from living with depth, with truth, with wholeness. Glory that doesn't need applause. Glory that comes from knowing, I went to the end, and God was there. And He is. Now, here. Even without you seeing. Even without you understanding. He is. So don't fear. Don't back down. Don't close your heart anymore. Open yourself. Allow. Take a deep breath and go. Because heaven hasn't finished writing. You are a living page of eternity. And the next chapter is already being revealed. And it's real. It's deep. It's supernatural. And it's for you. Write in the comments, Holy Spirit, touch my heart. If you believe He can restore all things. Share this blessed video so that it can touch and help other people like you and me. Want to delve even deeper into faith and prayer? Download our exclusive ebook on how to strengthen your spirituality today. The link is in the comments below. Don't forget to click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for being part of our community of faith. If you would like to support our channel a little more, consider becoming a member of our channel. I leave here 2 more videos so that you can continue your spiritual search and growth in faith. Thank you, and may God bless you all. See you later.